Hello and welcome to today's SymbiChain webinar presented in concert with the Chronicle of Higher Education, which we're calling Cross-Disciplinary Approaches to Blockchain Education. Today we'll be talking about a topic that is getting hotter by the minute, blockchain and education. Blockchain has been in the news a lot lately, largely due to the skyrocketing price of cryptocurrencies and an explosion of non-fungible tokens or NFTs. While all of these digital assets are based on an underlying blockchain technology, they are far from its only application. Blockchain technology has the potential to transform many sectors of the economy and not just the financial markets. Of particular interest to those of us in higher education is that the growing demand for graduates with experience in blockchain technology has risen considerably, especially for those who can combine technological know-how with knowledge from other domains. The demand for this type of technologist has increased even when factoring in the recent economic crises. Given these trends, how can the higher education community prepare students for this brave new world? Today, we've assembled a panel of experts to ponder that question. Our panel includes blockchain technologists and college educators. We'll start off with Anjon Roy, Vice President of SymbiChain, and then move on to hear more about the technology and how it's being applied from David Wasson, Education Practice Lead for SymbiChain. Then we'll learn about the experience of an educator from Ohio State University. Anníbal Camara Sodero is a professor of marketing and logistics at the Fisher College of Business at Ohio State. And I'm Michael Anft, a Chronicle contributor. I'll be moderating today's event. We'd like you to contribute too. Now and throughout the webinar, you'll be able to use the Zoom Q&A function to ask questions, which we'll get to toward the end of the webinar. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can during the webinar, but please leave us your email address in case we run out of time and we want to circle back with you later. You'll hear from us, believe me. We hope you enjoy the presentation and learn a few things. Anjon, I'll hand things over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Michael. That was great. And thank you all for attending today's session. And it's good for those of you who attended our previous session, there's going to be a little bit of a review here as we go over a primer on the basics of blockchain technology. But this will largely be new material that builds on and complements what we presented before. So as Michael said, we want to start things off on the basics of blockchain, but also why are cross-disciplinary approaches to blockchain and blockchain education so important? I think before we get into blockchain in particular, let's just talk about cross-disciplinary or people and approaches just much more in general, and a term that is not actually probably in the Webster's dictionary, but it's a term that some industry analysts have used. Gartner in particular and other industry analysts, this term called versatilists, people who have kind of themselves have a multitude of skills from different disciplines, that are kind of cross-disciplinary in themselves. And so I'm going to start off with, I'm going to cite some academic research for, further down in a couple of minutes. But I want to start off with this by saying, by citing this, something from the website of Dr. David Evans, one of your peers. He's a UVA professor of computer science, and from his blog or his faculty page, he's got a very rich page with a lot of material. And one of them, he cites Scott Adams, who's not an academic, he's a cartoonist and social commentator. But it's an interesting thing that he puts out there that, in fact, some research backs up, a lot of research backs up. He says, in general, if you want to be incredibly successful, you have two possible paths, and you don't have to be incredible. You could say very successful or whatever, however one defines, incredibly. But if you want to perform at a very high level, you either be in the absolute top tier of a given field, or be in the top 25% in two or more fields, multiple fields. And either are good paths. But here's the thing about number two: it's a lot easier to be in the top 25% of a given field or even multiple fields than to be in, say, the top tier, the top 1% or even 2% or even top 0.1% of a given field. If we build a world that only the people, and the only approach that we kind of suggest to those and suggest to students and suggest for ourselves is to try to be the absolute best in a given field, there's some challenges with that approach. One of them is it's a lot harder. But the other problem, I think, is just thinking more systemically is that we get ourselves into this zero-sum game. It's, because if you're competing to be the absolute best of the best in a given discipline, then you're really vying for what is, a positional good more than anything. It's much closer to a zero-sum game. But if we can say, look, if we can bring create more versatilists that are competent, significantly meaningfully competent in multiple fields, that creates much more opportunity for everybody. It gets us out of that kind of zero-sum game. It moves us towards something more of what is kind of collectively better. And it's also unique, this approach, because it is both an effective advice and an effective course to follow individually. And it also adds value in the aggregate in a very clear way, not in some very, very indirect way of, well, if I do good for myself, I do good for all. But sometimes then that gets you to justify all sorts of ways of how one would do good for oneself that may not always be the best. But this thinks that can be very zero-sum focused. This is less zero-sum focused. This is much more about, win-wins, best in the aggregate. So I'll say, the versatilist shall inherit the world. But the beauty is we can all become them. Certainly many more of us can become them. And that's a good thing. So that is very general. That is not specific to blockchain. But I would argue, and plenty of research argues, that it especially applies more so to blockchain and other emerging tech more generally. So why is that the case? Well, first, let's go and do a quick primer on blockchain. I'll give you the imaginary blockchain metaphor. And we'll just start from the top. Somebody who doesn't know anything about blockchain, maybe you read it in the news, but you know anything else. Imagine that you have yourself a Google spreadsheet, and sorry about that, and that we can all access, but we can only add additional lines. So we'll call that append only. And that's the append only part that you hear about blockchain. You can only add additional lines. You can't erase, you can't go back and update, you can't go back and delete. You can only add. Now I'll assume that we all own co-equal copies. Not Google owns it, not I own a copy and I own the master copy, or Google owns a master copy, and we all have, copies of the master. No, there is no master copy. We all own co-equal copies. That's the decentralization component that you hear about with blockchain. Now imagine that we all automatically stay in sync. Okay, we have co-equal copies and we automatically stay in sync. Those are the consensus algorithms that keep us in sync, so that we all have, in fact, the same Google spreadsheet. Not owned by Google, owned by all of us. And then our network then predetermines what information is shared, because some stuff will be shared, some won't. That's the transparency element you hear about, that blockchain gives you elements of transparency that you wouldn't otherwise have, or at least it gives you optionality around transparency that you wouldn't otherwise have. And our network predetermines what information is private. So for instance, in many cryptocurrency networks, the people who are transacting, it's private, unless if you shared, want to share your wallet, that's fine, or wallet information. But that is private. But the fact that a transaction occurring is public, and that's transparent. And that's how that network decided to set itself up. You don't have to necessarily set you up any other blockchain or crypto network or any other network like Bitcoin has, but that's generally how cryptocurrencies, and certainly Bitcoin, have chosen to set up their network. And then the other part of this, I think, is really interesting, and it's very important if you want to talk about higher order use cases for a blockchain, is this concept of smart contracts. And you'll hear a lot about that. And what really is a smart contract? Well, the term smart contract is probably an unfortunate choice of name that, in my opinion, that the industry settled on. Ultimately, what it is that we own our co-equal copies also have executable code, so that digital workflows can be guaranteed to execute. So it's really shared code. It's shared compute, or distributed compute, is really what a smart contract is. And why is that important? It solves the trust problem between us. If, for instance, we come to some type of collaborative agreement that requires some type of complex or semi-complex algorithms and compute to execute, if one of us owns if one of us has the master copy, that is going to change the nature by which we collaborate, and types of, and the modes of collaboration of which we come to agreement on. Even if it's not explicit, just the implication that, okay, this is the company X SaaS, software as a service, this is their thing. Just by that being a given, there are going to be different modes of collaboration, and they will be more narrow in optionality than if we had co-equal copies. So it opens up all sorts of possibilities in terms of how we collaborate and coordinate. And so across individuals and across organizations, both within and across them. So that smart contract is really, really important. So in the end, what does blockchain really provide? And there's a lot of one-sentence summaries that I've seen, and many of them are good. But I personally really liked this one. And blockchain enables multiple separate entities to share a single version of the data and keep that data in sync between themselves, thus removing the need to reconcile, message, propagate, sync, or otherwise maintain versions of data that are co-owned by different parties to reflect one another accurately. So at a very basic level, blockchain is, we know it's abstract, it's complex, it's socialized, it's hyper collaborative, which means it's a very social technology because it involves decentralization, because it provides avenues for people to collaborate and organizations to collaborate that they otherwise would not have been. And what that also means is, because of it is so hyper collaborative, it also means that you can change and transform existing modes of management, existing, say, legal processes, other existing disciplines. And it's being utilized across disciplines and sectors. And it really requires, in the end of the day, cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary approaches. Thus the main focus of our talk here today. And of course, it's in demand. So with that, ultimately for the industry to achieve the critical level of success that the potential is there for, we need to get professionals that are fluent in a variety of fields. We need to get a variety of professionals fluent, for the sector to really achieve the success. And the beauty of that is that opens up opportunity for individuals. That opens up opportunity for students. That opens up opportunity for researchers. It opens up opportunity because if you can actually meaningfully contribute to a sector's success, there is a much better chance that you're going to be able to, achieve success yourself. And so a little bit of research, blockchain offers these strong opportunities, I'd say, for versatilists and those who take these interdisciplinary approaches. So Zhang and Lee in 2020, blockchain has the potential to transform managerial and legal processes and research that often exceeds the boundaries of a single discipline. So, that's what they observed. And then Drutter in 2019, successful blockchain-based business solutions requires deployment of interdisciplinary teams of experts with domain-specific knowledge. So, you see that in blockchain in particular, that you take Scott Adams's quote of be in the top 25% in multiple fields. That is a recipe for success. In blockchain, that's especially the case because you need interdisciplinary teams to succeed. You need those approaches to succeed. And the absence of those approaches is going to dampen or preclude any type of success. So I would say in that case, you may not even have to be in the top 25% in fields if you're talking about blockchain, because the need is so strong. And and this concept of interdisciplinary competence, I want to quickly talk about. And the foster innovation and effective interdisciplinary teamwork, you got to practice that. You got to become interdisciplinary competent. And then, the increased market demand for interdisciplinary competences necessitates universities to support students' ability to collaborate across disciplines. Okay, so that means students that may be majoring in different departments. That means departments working together. That especially means non-technology departments working with each other and perhaps with some of the more technology-focused departments. Taking this interdisciplinary approach, because interdisciplinary doesn't just happen overnight. It's a muscle that has to be built. And so students have to start building that early, and build that interdisciplinary competence, both kind of individually and more institutionally. And then finally, I leave that last bottom one. If Web 3.0 drives technology to become ubiquitous, then the real differentiators will be those who understand domain-specific applications. That's not in an academic journal. AR is actually me, Anjon Roy, writing in a white paper, or a blog rather, in January 2020. That's my hypothesis, and it's a confident one, and it's backed up certainly by industry experience and the experience of those who do write in academic journals. So those are going to be the real differentiators, especially as we move towards technology ubiquity, ironically. Yeah. And I'll leave you with this, what we call the 80-20 rule that various kind of consulting firms and industry analysts have referred to. Gartner McKinsey said, for blockchain to show the real impact, its real promise, to take it to the next level, we're going to have to reverse the 80-20 rule. And what is the 80-20 rule? The 80-20 rule is, right now, about 80%, although it's probably improving. This is dated a little bit. 80% of the discussion is driven by technologists around blockchain. those are the people who know, and that's going to be the case in any emerging technology. But in particular in blockchain, 80% is being driven by the technologists, 20% is being driven by people outside, a technology folks discipline, what we would call domain specific individuals. We need to reverse that, and for the sector to really gain the success that it has a potential to achieve. So this offers a huge opportunity for versatility, for people who are versatilists, for people who have interdisciplinary competence. And the other part to leave you with is these benefits will flow individually to those who build interdisciplinary competence, and it will flow collectively. So it solves both an individual action problem as well as our classic collective action problems, because it's not like the type of thing that, well, if everybody does this, it's no longer a differentiator and therefore it's not as useful, which many of our other paradigms are. This is not that. This is, if everybody does this, everybody will be better off. It's not like if you stand up in a movie theater so you can see better, it works. But if everybody does it, then there's no use because you're all just standing up. This is not that. This is something that is both individually beneficial as well as collectively beneficial. And so with that, I'm going to hand things off to my good friend and colleague, David Wasson. And David, it's all yours.
Great, Anjon, thank you for that. So yeah, today I'm just gonna say a few words about career demand in blockchain, and I have updated this since our last Chronicled webinar with some new information. So I'm gonna start with a quote, and this quote is from a gentleman named Art Malkov, and he's an advisor at Columbia University at their blockchain accelerator. And what Mr. Malkov says is that blockchain has achieved mainstream viability in a number of areas. And that's a great thing for the industry. Every skill set is valued, and one doesn't need the technical knowledge that certain other emerging technologies demand. And I think some of the key words there are every skill set matter. And I think that relates to cross-discipline, education in blockchain. And I also say that the mainstream is another key word. And I think if you had to label 2020 in terms of blockchain, it was definitely the year of mainstream adoption. So go on, Anjon. So yeah, so this is just a list of the types of organizations and specific examples of those organizations. So one would be large corporations. I mean, companies such as Walmart, Honeywell, Boeing. You have the Forbes 50 blockchain report for 2021 is worth looking at. You'll see companies in there like Cargill, Daimler, Microsoft, the NBA, and you'll also see the different companies and the description of how they're utilizing blockchain and what the use cases are and the type of blockchain networks that they're using. But in the financial markets, you'll see mainline banks like JP Morgan Chase, BNY Mellon, Citigroup, Credit Suisse, investment firms like Fidelity, Goldman Sachs, Vanguard. You'll also see in insurance, Mass Mutual, Aon Insurance, financial services like MasterCard and Venmo and PayPal, and then large, venture capital firms like Andreessen Horowitz, Union Square Ventures, Pantera, and then exchanges. A lot of these are digital asset exchanges like Coinbase and Binance, but you also see, like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. You'll see the Chicago Board of Trade, and then in the government sector, you see Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Securities Exchange Commission, and even the Department of Education is involved with blockchain now. So go on, Anjon. Yeah, and logistics, companies such as Maersk, FedEx, UPS, actually the Defense Logistics Agency of the United States government, where actually one of our key leads in the supply chain, Jeff Curtis, actually is a retired executive from the DLA, and also consulting firms like Capgemini, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG. Go on, Anjon. And accelerators, R3 Ventures, Techstars, a large accelerator in the blockchain space, and Consensus as well. And then this slide, this is provided by LinkedIn. It was a report that they did where they named blockchain as the #1 hard skill in demand for the year 2020. And also, in addition to that, it shows that blockchain demand growth was 33x in terms of the number of jobs in demand from 2017 to 2020. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but just to make a point. So non-technical opportunities, and kind of on the top left-hand side, you'll see a lot of, things like project manager, business development. These are all in very high demand. Supply chain specialists and operations, business analysts, also product strategy. But what you also notice with these next ones is that really blockchain, in my view, is not so much just a technology breakthrough. It's really it's an economic and financial breakthrough. So therefore, you see a lot of these ones following there is things like investment portfolio, risk management, loan analysts, regulatory analysts for know your customer and anti-money laundering. So you get a lot of financial opportunities and economic opportunities. And then over on the right-hand side, you see more of the traditional support type roles like customer service, customer success, public relations, regulatory compliance, and things like, recruitment and human resources. So continue on. And so how are the educators responding, to provide students with, both meaningful and I guess, employable skills, things that really matter in the world in terms of, applying what they're learning about blockchain to real world careers. So there's several different ways that we've noticed or that we've talked with universities about the way they're engaging. One is through, we have some universities that don't want to take the deep dive and jump right into offering it in their curriculum or setting up a whole different program. So they're offering it in a workshop setting. Some of these are 4-week workshops where they're going to teach, basic principles of blockchain, things like what is a wallet, what is cryptography, what is consensus. And then they may follow that up with from the basic principles. They may move into having students develop, or students and faculty in some cases actually with our customers, where they're going to develop a hands-on use case and kind of develop a white paper around that, a business plan, and then create a application or a proof of concept to show that actually works and that it's a viable application and a use case. And then they also kind of at the end of that say, well, did blockchain really make a difference? Did it improve the business model? I mean, that's kind of the critical thinking that goes with that in the workshop. And then other universities and colleges, they've set up a standalone blockchain program. For instance, Portland State, who was here the last time at the Chronicle webinar, Portland State has set up their business in blockchain. So it's within their business program, but rather than incorporating blockchain into their existing curriculum, like for instance, into accounting or finance, they've set up a standalone program where they offer a certificate. So most of the subjects, of course, are around business, accounting and finance and economics, but the program is actually a standalone. And then other universities and colleges are incorporating blockchain directly into existing curriculum. You see a lot of that now. You may have a university that has a business management course. It's 12 weeks. And maybe what they're going to do is they're going to add blockchain to a third of that. So the last 4 weeks of that existing curriculum may talk about the value that blockchain brings to that subject, like if it's accounting or business management or supply chain, which I know Dr. Sodero is going to talk about today. And where does blockchain add value into that subject, into the existing curriculum? And then another popular way that we've seen universities kind of enter into the blockchain world of education is through the students. Actually, there's blockchain clubs at many, many universities. In fact, there's 82 that at least that I've identified. So these are 82 known blockchain clubs that are student run, they're student led, their students are bootstrapping it. And oftentimes they'll have a faculty advisor or at least someone getting involved. And before you know it, eventually, as blockchain becomes greater exposed in the organization, that ultimately, there's going to be some curriculum that's going to involve blockchain, and it's a way for universities to kind of ease into it. But we do see a lot of students kind of driving it at the university level. So that's all I wanted to talk about, in terms of careers. What I would like to do now is introduce Dr. Sodero. So Dr. Sodero is he's an educator and researcher at Ohio State University Fisher College of Business. I personally have had the pleasure of working with Dr. Sodero for almost a year now, working both with him and his students in several different courses that he's going to talk about today. So it's a pleasure. Dr. Sodero, thank you for being here, and I'll leave it to you now.
Thank you very much, David. Hello, everybody. And what I want to do here is to explain to you what Anjon and David talked about, how that relates to what we're doing here at The Ohio State University, and more specifically, how we are incorporating blockchain into our curriculum. So to give you a background, as David was alluding to, I was designing classes, and I'm talking about 3 classes here at Ohio State: logistics, technology, supply chain at the undergraduate level, and the supply chain management at the MBA level last year. And I was designing these classes to teach now in the spring. So what I'm talking to you today is something that we have results that are very fresh about classes that just finished a couple of weeks ago. And these classes, they are 1.5 credit hour classes. So they are taught in 8 weeks. Here at the Ohio State, we typically have half semesters. So this may be something different than what you're used to. Our program in logistics and supply chain management is consistently ranked among the top in the country. We are very pleased to announce that we are ranked number 6 according to the US News and World Report this year. And I think that there are many reasons for that. I would mention 2, which is the academic rigor that we bring, but particularly related to this presentation, the relevance, the managerial relevance that we bring to our courses, the relationship to tools, techniques, and what companies are doing. And I want to explain this as I go about describing the courses. So we had, I will explain the 2 undergraduate level courses, but you can extend that to the MBA class as well. The first one is the logistics technology class. And this one presents a synthesis of principles in logistics technology that emphasizes how technologies emerge and are used for logistics and supply chain management. So here you can already see the connection to blockchain, particularly because it's an emerging technology. So as we go and we discuss issues with students, we can bring the blockchain and see how it is an emergent technology for logistics and supply chain. The focus of this class was on principles, and I will discuss these 4 areas of standardization, assimilation of technology, integration among different technologies, and the use of technology for decision-making, which is key, a key feature provided by the use of blockchain. So this last sentence here, it was the last sentence in the design of the course before we included the blockchain, was that the major goal of the class was to expose students to situations that emulate what they will be facing when using a technology like blockchain in practice. But after we established a partnership with SimbaChain, we included the final sentence here, which was that we wanted to have in this class to provide students a hands-on, real-world experience on the deployment of an application, including its code. Even though students didn't have to code at all, they didn't have to know how to code, but they would see the result of their work. They would see the code generated by using and deploying an application, a blockchain application, in order to develop among students a greater ability to map processes into technology requirements. So we had 4 goals, and we just got the results. I think we achieved these goals this semester very well. First was to understand the processes that lead to emergence of new technology, new logistics technology like the blockchain. So David provided you a few examples of companies that are using the blockchain for logistics and supply chain like Maersk, FedEx, UPS, and Walmart. We could discuss those cases in the classroom, and then the students will directly relate to that as they were working on their blockchain project. Second was an understanding of the stages of assimilation. So why companies engage and decide to adopt a technology like the blockchain and how they go about to use it. An understanding of interdependencies among technologies and the impact of technologies for decision-making. So let me give you a little bit more of detail about that. In terms of standardization, it was very important to discuss with students how standards like standards for the blockchain emerge, because of course you want to have the same kind of technology being used across entities in your supply chain. Many people collaborating and working together, of course you need to standardize what they're doing, both in terms of hardware and software. This is a key area. Decision-making. And I think that Anjon talked about that very well, that when you think about having visibility and traceability across the supply chain, but particularly when you bring the concept of trust, people working together and collaborating and having trust between each other, I think that's a key concept that comes up when we talk about the supply chain. Integration, of course, you need different technologies to input data, to extract information. When you're using a technology like the blockchain, it has to interact with multiple technologies, including, for example, the Internet of Things. And finally, assimilation. So I alluded to this before, which is why would organizations think about engaging and adopting a technology like the blockchain, how they would go about to implement it and routinize in terms of incorporating the blockchain into their processes. So I think it's quite straightforward when you're thinking about a class in logistics technology, how the blockchain would directly relate to that. A more, I would say, challenging and even more interesting, and that could provide more value environment to students would be a supply chain management class, because perhaps that the connection is not quite direct when you begin to think about. But let me explain to you how important the blockchain is for a supply chain management course. So here what we were looking at was to present a synthesis of principles in supply chain processes, the workflows that Anjon alluded to earlier, emphasizing the cross-functional integration across supply chain entities. So not only talking about organizations, but also people, consumers, citizens, and other entities like technology, like robots and other kinds of devices. So I think that the blockchain, when you begin to think that you need to manage all those entities, manage the relationships among them, the blockchain can help you with that because, and I will go into detail how it provides visibility and interoperability among all entities in the supply chain. So the processes that we focused on our class, they provided knowledge for planning, organizing, operating, and controlling supply chains, following sound business principles. And a first and very important goal that we had was to enable students to incorporate those principles under an overall conceptual supply chain strategy framework, which would be to be able to understand how you map your supply chain, what are the entities involved, what are the problems, what are the issues in the supply chain, and how you manage those relationships. And a second objective was to develop among students a greater ability to apply those principles to solve practical real-life problems. So again, when we have the course description, when we have our objectives, you can see how a tool like SymbaChain or a blockchain technology can help us achieve our goals, because we were looking at understanding essential processes, understanding workflows in supply chains, understanding tools and techniques. So what are the techniques and tools like a blockchain that allow you to implement your supply chain strategy? And finally, even understand how supply chain management affects society at large. And blockchain has a key role here to play, and I will explain this. As I described the 4 blocks that we had, just like in the logistics technology, where you had 4 blocks in the classroom, here we have 4 areas, 4 modules, 4 blocks. The first one talking about scope of supply chains, local, regional, and global supply chains. So when you think about using the blockchain to be able to see all the entities that are positioned globally or regionally or locally in your supply chain and having visibility and allowing for collaboration, that's extremely important. That's a fundamental tool for you to use. Another area that's key, and perhaps all of you can relate to this, is sustainability. We as citizens, we as consumers, we want to know where the chicken came from, where the cocoa came from, where the diamonds came from, or furniture, how was it made, how was it shipped, how it got to our households. So you, even you, as a citizen, you want to be able to see what's happening throughout the supply chain. The blockchain is a technology that allows you to do so. In terms of risk and resilience, also, when you're mapping and working with different entities across the globe or even locally, and you need to see what they're doing, and you need to be prepared to be able to respond to some disruption in your supply chain because of a cyber attack or because of a natural disaster, for example. If you have full visibility, if you're using technology that allows you to collaborate across your supply chain, that's a way to go. And finally, and related to what we saw in the logistics technology class, was thinking in terms of adoption and diffusion of innovations, but this not only at the organizational level, but at the ecosystem level. How the blockchain allows this connection among different entities in this ecosystem to adopt and to implement a technology like the blockchain. Also for process design and redesign. So it allows you to improve your processes. And finally, something that's specific and goes beyond logistics, is specific to supply chain, is when you think about developing new products. That's something that you can go beyond, not only thinking about moving things, moving information and moving cash, but working also in other areas in your business. So this was, I think it was a very powerful tool that complemented what we were doing in the course. The courses were structured around those 4 blocks. We had discussions among students, we played games, and to link and solidify the knowledge that was developed over a course of 8 weeks, we had a project, the blockchain hackathon. So the blockchain hackathon was a requirement for students to work directly on Simba chain. And here's what students were required to do. So first, they were provided an overview. We're selling our idea, which was, look, you are among the first in the world to adopt, to practice a project like this in supply chain management, because still this is very new in terms of supply chain management and logistics teaching. Blockchain is much more used at the business schools in other areas, particularly finance. So we were underscoring to students, look, this is new, and that's something that will provide you value when you go to the job market. In terms of learning outcomes, what we wanted to see was students being able to map a supply chain, to map processes, to see a workflow, and then translate that into the blockchain. So we provided, in terms of roadmap, what we asked students to do, to talk to me, discuss with me, was, I want to see how the banana gets to my house, how milk gets to my house, how can I consume beer, chocolate, whatever commodity or product they wanted to focus on. This was extremely important for a few reasons. First of all, many students are going to do their internships. So they were going to go to work at companies, and they wanted to show, hey, look, now I not only understand what you do, but I have worked with a tool that allows me to manage the supply chain in a very interesting way. So they could pick, I want to work with soda, I want to work with beer, and then I'm going to my internship and I can have that in my utility belt. So they picked the commodity, then they mapped the supply chain, they, to the best of their ability, map all the entities and the relationships in their supply chain. We provided a lot of documentation. Simba chain, I worked with Simba chain to develop a manual. We also had video showing students how to develop the smart contracts and how to deploy their applications. And then they were required to actually deploy the application and be able to, on Ethereum, to have that public information available for other students to validate their deployment. Here's an example of what one of the students did. So this student was interested in mapping the beer supply chain because she was going to do an internship at Anheuser, at Budweiser. So here's an overview. So she had to map the supply chain and translate that mapping into Simba chain. So it was very interesting, the process that students went about, because after we did this project, students came to me and they said, hey, I was looking at beer, I was looking at banana, I was looking at cocoa, and I couldn't imagine how complex that was. I really thought that that was quite straightforward. That was linear. That was very easy to trace. That was very easy to map. And it was nothing like that. So they went to see the history of those products, the history of those services, and understand, contextualize where they came from, the issues, the key issues in terms of production, distribution, consumption, sustainability, all those areas that are important for professionals in logistics and supply chain management, and for us in society at large. So the current state, the current issues that needed to be addressed. So then this was super cool, which was, so here students had to map their supply chain. I actually asked them to draw diagrams, and here's where they actually found out how complex, how interesting the supply chains were. And now what they had to do was to take this diagram that they had handwritten and translate that to a smart contract on Simba chain. So for example, in the beer supply chain, you have farmers, you have brewers, you have wholesalers, distributors, retailers, and their transactions, the transactions that go between those entities. So they mapped the supply chain, they translated that to Simba chain, they developed, deployed that application, and they got their code. And deploying that, and ultimately, I think it was a very nice learning experience, new exposure to students. And now if you can relate what Anjon and David said to what we did in the course, you see how important was developing this project in this course. And of course, I'm looking forward to continuing this relationship and improving what we did so far and moving forward in the next years, incorporating the blockchain in our curriculum. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sodero, and we'll take up this screen. And David, would you like to? We'd like to take things and then close things out, and then we'll move to Q&A.
Yeah, that's perfect. And thank you, Dr. Sodero. Thank you, Anjon. So, yeah, just kind of wrapping up. Just as Dr. Sodero mentioned, I mean, Simba Chain provides tools. It's a tool for students to use to map out a business use case and create code and launch an application, but they can do all of that with no coding or programming experience. Students literally visually build out their business model and create an application. So it's very useful, it's intuitive. But we also, in addition to just providing tools for your students to learn about blockchain, and we also provide a lot of services around that. We really believe in educating the educator, training the trainer, so that you're, as an educator, able to answer a lot of those questions. We also provide services where we're working directly with your students, if that's something that you'd like. And in some cases, if they're stuck on how an application works, how does this asset and transaction relate to each other in this business model, we can provide those services as well. And I think lastly, we also provide certifications in some cases. We actually are doing that at Ohio State, where the students complete certain requirements in terms of understanding basic principles of blockchain and being able to create a use case and an application, and they get a Simba certificate. It's actually on chain, so it's verifiable on chain. And I think last, in some instances, we actually will provide education services to augment yours. If you would like us to come in and actually instruct on the basic principles of blockchain and assist you with that portion of the course, we do that as well. I think that's it, Anjon. So I think questions and answers, Anjon?
Yes, let's move on to questions and answers. And we have a couple of, feel free to put them up. You can email us directly. Or put them up, and we've got a couple of questions that are on the line, and one of them, both are actually for Dr. Sodero, so a couple of them, but we may have a couple more that'll be coming soon, I'm sure. So what outside companies did Dr. Sodero did you work with to develop your curriculum? You obviously worked with us for some of it, but specifically on the curriculum, is the question from Kylene.
Thank you very much for the question. We work with many companies to develop our curriculum, not only based on personal contacts and the faculty contacts, but particularly because we have an advisory council. So the advisory council has companies of multiple sizes, so multinational corporations that are global and even small companies that are local to, I'm talking to you from Columbus, Ohio. So we have different firms at different levels and positioned at different levels across the supply chain. So we have carriers, logistics providers, we have manufacturers and retailers and CPG companies and technology companies and in the sector of finance and so on and so forth. So we receive inputs from multiple sectors, and that's why we can develop a curriculum that is all-encompassing, that allows students to pursue careers in many, many areas that are not only limited. Let's say, for example, logistics. Many people think that logistics is only working in a warehouse and in a transportation company. That's not correct at all. Having a curriculum in logistics and more expanded to supply chain management allows you to work in several areas, including sales.
Great. We have a question from Kamala. Does Ohio State blockchain connect to SAP Oracle supply chain modules?
So the technical issues of how you connect the technology, I can leave to Simba Chain to discuss, because our focus is on the concept and that we are agnostic in terms of the technology, how you use it, right? So in our curriculum, we were only focused on developing the application and deploying it. Now, how you're going to store and how you're going to manage that, how you're going to extract your reports and gain your insights, that's another kind of conversation. I think that the key is being agnostic so that students understand the principles. That's what we're focused on. Understand the principles, they understand the logic, so that when they go out in the market, and if the company is working with SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, it doesn't matter, they will be able to do so. They will be able to learn that real fast and be ready to go and hit the ground running.
Yeah. We have a, thank you. We have a question from Nishani, 2 questions from her. She said, do you have a network of scholars who do cross-disciplinary work with the humanities field? I'm particularly curious, given that there are clear links between outside world realities, history, politics, and culture, and its implication for the economy or supply chain production and or disruption. That's number 1. And number 2, have you or do you work with humanities educators? I think that's a question for both, probably all of us here, but Dr. Sodero and David both. Do you work with a network of scholars, or are you aware of any in the humanities field? It's not your field, Dr. Sodero, but perhaps you might be aware.
I could take a stab at that. So,
okay.
So one of our customers actually is Flinders University. They happen to be in Australia, and we're working pretty deeply with their social sciences group, which is obviously social sciences research. And what we've been working is applying blockchain to the whole social media world in terms of mis and disinformation, where they're using blockchain to be able to do forensic analysis of media that's in the public that may be falsified. And they've created this solution using Simba Chain that uses blockchain as the base for that. So that would be one example.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you, David. I'm not aware of any humanities specific networks, but I'm not specifically aware, but I'm thinking somewhere that I've heard that they do exist, but I haven't looked at them. Interesting that you mentioned this, because we have been. It's not announced yet, certainly, but I guess I'll bring it up here on the record. We are looking at doing a future webinar on blockchain and humanities. It's a specific version of taking the interdisciplinary approach, but specific to humanities, and why there's actually a lot of opportunity as well as need for that. And it's something that, full disclosure, I've been giving a lot of thought to, but as an organization, we haven't made an announcement whether or not we're going to do that. We probably will later this year, because I do agree with you that that there are, for the same reasons we talked about here today on cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches, those disciplines should also include humanities. There's no doubt about it. And there may be opportunities there for humanities to contribute that are very unique and shall I say, maybe often overlooked, but they're really important. And that's my hypothesis, and it's a confident one, and it's one backed with evidence. And so we'll be looking for that. And certainly, Nishani, if you do find any humanities networks, humanities educators that are looking at this, feel free to let us know about them. We would love to get to know more beyond those that we're already working with. But Dr. Sodero, do you have anything to add to that, or do you like?
No, I don't. Just one thing is that definitely we are interdisciplinary, so not directly with humanities, but in the area of sustainability. It directly touches upon what we do in supply chain management. And we have an interdisciplinary curriculum here that we actually have faculty that has double appointment at the Fisher, the College of Business, and the Sustainability School that work on this at this intersection. But thank you so much for the question, and that's something that we're trying to work more on, but definitely that's weak areas at this moment.
Great. Elisa just asked, made a comment I think we'd love to share. She said, I love the exercises of mapping out the supply chain. So she may be one of your students, I'm going to guess. All right, well, you've got a fan. John asks, what do you imagine a high school blockchain course without coding could cover? What sorts of hands-on projects would be feasible? David, do you have any hypotheses there? I'm going to put you on the spot because you might have some knowledge of that, or at least an idea of what a high school blockchain course could, in your imagination, cover.
Right, and so we are actually, Simba is actually being used in a couple high schools. We have a partnership with Digital Leader Academy, and their kind of motto is to bring Silicon Valley to the high schools. And so actually Simba Chain is being used as a tool to teach. It's embedded in a logistics course at Ivy Tech, which is actually a cross credit. So there's high school students involved in that course. And they're learning about, happens to be logistics actually. They're learning about how logistics and blockchain can work together to provide value. And then another example too is we're working with a nonprofit in Atlanta, which is called STEAM Revolution. And STEAM Revolution work with high school age students and urban students in the metro Atlanta area. And they teach things like entrepreneurship, and they embed technologies like AR and drones. And now they've added to the lineup for the high school students, they've added blockchain. So they're using Simba Chain to have those students create applications and deploy lots of blockchain.
Great, thank you, David. Kuhn asks, can Simba Chain be used in accounting, in an accounting curriculum? Do you have examples? David, I think we do. Last month in Portland State, but others too. I'll ask again, Kuhn asks, can Simba Chain be used in accounting curriculums, and do we have examples? I think we do.
Oh yeah, it is
plenty
being used indirectly at Portland State, right? Because they have, they set up the blockchain program. It's a blockchain certificate program where it's within the business school. So actually one of the professors that's running that is a professor of accounting. So they are teaching elements of how blockchain can be applied to accounting and you know, the whole idea of digital assets and how to account for those based on you know, payments and receiving assets and how to create, you know, is it a short-term, long-term capital gain? Is it a taxable event and those type of things? So yes, it is being applied to accounting, yes.
Sorry, I was muted. Jackie mentions more of a comment. Sociology loves to have a mini module to apply to globalization and human rights. Yes, absolutely. Those are cases where you really need almost a synthesis approach or a true cross-disciplinary, where you're not just taking multiple disciplines, but actually synthesizing them into new disciplines. And that's something we didn't go too much into in the presentation. Wasn't really time, but the difference between multidisciplinary, which is more, you know, separate disciplines working together, versus cross-disciplinary, which is much more of the synthesis approach. And I do think we're going to see those types of approaches more. We're already seeing it in blockchain and general, the application of, you know, as we hit, you know, reaching our kind of technology ubiquity, fields, you know, be new fields that'll be born. So yeah, and that being an example that Jackie brings up. Kevin asked a question, and this will be back to Dr. Sodero probably, is in addition to blockchain, do you incorporate foundational technology concepts into your supply chain management curriculum? For example, I cover the evolution of data storage and retrieval from the 60s and 70s through relational databases into big data before we get to blockchain. I think it helps them make sense of blockchain, what's similar and what's different. interesting, but question for actually both David and Dr. Sodero there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your question, Kevin. I myself am a computer scientist by training, and I do research on big data and the use of information systems and technology at large for supply chain management. So I have an appreciation for that, but this is not about me, it's about our program, right? And when you think about information systems and technology in general, that's so important these days for supply chain management and logistics. All these organizations we hear about, Amazon, Google, Apple, all of them are in this space of logistics and supply chain, right? So we need to have an understanding of that. Going into the nitty-gritty aspects, yes, absolutely. So one thing that we talk about, particularly in the logistics technology class, is the emergence of the barcode. I am talking to you from Ohio, and Kroger is from here, and that's where the barcode began actually before even Walmart started to doing that, right? So that's a story, history that we discuss in the classroom, and students get really excited about that. So seeing the evolution of technology, and then understanding, for example, why the blockchain or how the blockchain is different from electronic data interchange, for example, or even ERP systems, or how it connects to those, is extremely important for students. And it's part of the modules like standardization module, the integration module. That's something that we definitely need to underscore to show students, look, here's the plethora, the vast range of technologies that are out there. How does each relate to each other? How are they similar and how are they different? Because once you begin to understand that when you're implementing EDI, or when you're using barcode, right? Or when you're using big data, how that relates to the blockchain. You're understanding some concepts, some fundamentals here. When you translate to other technology, you have what's most important, which is an understanding of those fundamentals. So yes, definitely, and thank you so much for your question.
Great. Adam asks a very similar, a good add-on to what you just answered is blockchain used in conjunction with tech like RFID assets, ID tags, NFC, that's near field communications for those who don't know the acronym, or could a chain related to an asset be added to by other means? I think the answer is yes. I mean, you started to touch on that. That's very much within line of supply chain use cases for blockchain, is incorporating those types of physical binding tech features and technologies.
It is in line when we talk about having visibility across the supply chain, or even tackling an issue like inventory record inaccuracy, for example, which is you have information in your systems that's different from the actual inventory that you have. So RFID is an extremely important technology that standalone can help organizations to tackle a problem like inventory record inaccuracy and have visibility. But on top of that, if you're using a different technology like the blockchain, you're adding to that and you're bringing more value, right?
Yeah, that's great. Kamal asks again, any examples of students using blockchain as a capstone project in accounting and finance to develop strategy and or internal controls? So anyone who wants to take that between David and Dr. Sodero, David, you may have some examples. Dr. Sodero.
Yeah, I'd have to give that one some thought. I have to give some thought to that one. We are doing some capstone work right now with Indiana University, but it's involving things like fisheries and construction. So in terms of accounting, I don't know. I have to check on that, Kamala.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. We are kind of at the very end. We're going to wrap things up. So if you have a final question, please put that into the chat box right now. We will take one last question. If we don't get any questions, I will take my moderator's privilege or quasi-moderator's privilege. Michael and I share that. And to make a comment that Dr. Sodero, to your presentation that I really thought was interesting, and it dovetailed on what we talked about earlier about it's not just across the collaboration across companies and the diffusion of technology, but to the broader ecosystem. Particularly if you talk about, and blockchain enthusiasts will understand this, when you talk about publishing on mainnet, which we're seeing more and more, various applications that publish on mainnet, validating something, putting it on a hash code on the mainnet, a digital fingerprint on the mainnet, so that someone else can validate. That's a really, really powerful use case, because it's a way that you can collaborate outside our traditional kind of siloed organizations. You can collaborate kind of across an ecosystem, even across all of society too, and to me, that only reinforces the case for the importance of kind of interdisciplinary approaches and developing interdisciplinary competence, because those types of collaborations will take forms that will leverage various disciplines. And so it's not really a question, it's more of a comment and observation to your point that really, I think, dovetailed and reinforced what we talked about earlier. So thank you all. And I think we're at 59 past the hour. So that is pretty close to the top of the hour. So that was the last question at this point. I don't think we're going to get another one. Well, some people, well, really quick, email us if you have any other questions. Well, a bunch just came in. Rich mentioned Symbichain versus Ethereum. Well, that's not an either or. Symbichain is actually protocol neutral, supports about 9 different protocols, more to come, Ethereum being one of the earliest ones that we do. We sit above that. We're what we call a higher level platform that's independent of protocols. Beverly mentioned your syllabus online. Is your syllabus online at OSU? And it probably is. But beyond that, I think we'll let Michael hand things off. And thank you all. And please email us if you have any questions. So
great. Well, a ton of information there. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Anjon, David, and Anníbal for sharing all your thoughts today. As Anjon mentioned, you can email Symba Blockchain. You have the addresses right in front of you there on the slide. We hope that you learned a lot today. I know I did. And keep an eye out for future Symbichain webinars this summer. We're going to have at least one more, I believe, right, Anjon? 1 or 2?
we will. We have one tentative. We have one scheduled for July that should be announced pretty shortly. And then there'll be more in the fall as well. So please be on the lookout.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.